Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation to talk about a very important topic. The database, I know it's a start. It's an important tool for policymakers and for the public to be aware about these cases and their impact on our national security. When I was in government, I was in the Consular Affairs Bureau for much of my time in the State Department. We, in fact, did war game cases like this in training sessions in our own process of reviewing that, particularly after 9/11, how secure and effective our visa security procedures actually were. And it's an imperfect process, but what this database shows and what our experience shows, one, is the power of watch listing, particularly biometrics. These cases, we'll talk about a couple of them in my period here. The effect of a name that was captured, as they say in the trade, a known or suspected terrorist, a KST, and that identity was captured and watch listed with biometrics is a very effective tool. We'll see why it failed here in a couple of the cases. But that I want to highlight for government policymakers. There's always controversy about watch listing, how it's done. Sometimes it's overly zealous. But when we can create effective watch listing records based on biometrics, we have an incredibly valuable tool in national security. The second tool, a very important tool, is simply interviewing and having contact with, in the case of the State Department, visa applicants. That's why we place people in forward positions in consular sections and embassies and consulates abroad. It's why we typically interview all the applicants. It is unrecorded and unknowable, frankly, how many potentially nefarious foreign applicants who wanted to get a visa and were turned down, not because we caught them with our watch listing information, because they were unknown to us, and not, frankly, even because we identified them when we interviewed them. But we found that their story didn't make sense, that there was gaps in the story, and the consular officer who did the interview under our visa law had the authority simply to turn them down, not because they had hard information that he may have been a KST or a criminal or whatever, simply because the story didn't make sense. The value of this interviewing contact with applicants is huge. Unfortunately, right now, State Department is besieged worldwide because of the COVID pandemic with massive backlogs. It is important, nevertheless, I suggest to colleagues that we take the time to still do the interviewing, to live with the backlogs, because it goes to the question of one of the pillars in our security, which is to talk to people, find out why they're coming to the country. During the Obama administration, there was Executive Order 13597, which, among other things, commanded that consular sections abroad manage and complete the visa process and application, screening, interviewing within 3 weeks. This was done, pressure from the tourism industry, the universities, higher education, et cetera, all the forces, political special interests in the United States who want fast and quick visa issuances. It's important for the White House to push back against that. The Obama executive order created an artificial timeline to hurry the processing of visas. That was, in my judgment, unwise. This administration the current administration has not done that, replicated that, simply because the backlogs are too vast in non-immigrant visa processing worldwide for it to do it. But this administration has been unprecedented in some of the steps it has taken in the context of opening our borders. So again, keep in mind those two principles of effective visa security, travel security. Our system is multi-layered, and we'll go into a couple of cases to show how it worked. From the database, there's a case of a Saudi national, Al-Falaj is his name. He, in 2011, received an F2 visa. He was accompanying his spouse who received the principal F1 student visa to study in the United States. Now, in 2011, sets a scenario, 10 years post 9/11, you would have had in Riyadh not only the original visa interview by State Department, and we keep people in these countries, they know the language, the culture, so they have some idea of the dynamics. You have a Saudi man going with his wife, keep in mind that society, to be second fiddle, and perhaps in one interpretation, for years as his wife studied. I am sure that scenario would have been scrubbed in an interview. But nevertheless, Al-Falaj was successful. He got his visa. After 9/11, the law put in place in many overseas embassies and consulates the so-called visa security program, visa security units. It's a DHS program in which DHS stations security specialists to work on security travel in foreign embassies. They would have seen this file as well. They would have approved it and let it go through. There's two failures there. Then this individual travels to Oklahoma, where his wife was a student. He does whatever he does for several years. He's off our radar, apparently, but he does travel back and forth. CBP would have seen him in at least two entry points. One, when he first went into the United States, and secondly, when he came back. The record's incomplete, but I suspect he traveled multiple times. He would have been fingerprinted in all of these instances. When he did all visa applicants go through and give fingerprints and a photograph for facial recognition reviews, etc. So you've had multiple failures. In 2016, this individual decides he wants to enroll in a flight training school in Oklahoma. This is right out of the playbook that Mohammed Atta used, the ringleader of the 9/11 plot. And in fact, after that, the U.S. government established something that was called the Alien Flight Student Program, run by TSA. So this individual had to be printed again and approved for this flight training program. Never mind that he's not on the right visa. He's on an F2 visa. It doesn't give him permission to go and study like this, but apparently that was not a trigger. We don't get anything out of those prints. It's only later, a year later, after Al-Falaj has completed his flight training program, this guy had a pilot's license, that somehow he pings with a hit on a review of his prints, and he suddenly is known to us as someone with a record. And in fact, it's a very serious record. His prints came to us from an operation in Afghanistan, in Kandahar, where latent prints were found on documents. But 15 years later, those documents were cleaned up, those prints were found, they were integrated into the system, and we were able to identify this guy before he got into an airplane and did any kind of damage in our country. You see multiple failures there, but what it says again is the power of biometrics watch listing. This guy was clever enough in all of his interviews and interactions with American officials to get through and not be pulled out as a suspect.
And Phil, if, in case you might plan to note this, but the fingerprints were found in the same training camps that all of the Al-Qaeda operatives who did 9/11, or some of them, trained in at the same time that they trained in the year 2000.
Correct. I mean, from the record that we have, and we have an affidavit from the FBI JTTF agent who followed this case. Now, he put together the case based on the prints. Apparently, in the business of prints, you have to clean up latent prints, get them into the system. This would have been the FBI fingerprint database, presumably. It's routinely pinged for all visa travelers and all LPR and other asylum cases that come to USCIS. But if we don't have the prints in the system, we're not going to get a match. It goes to the question, since 9/11, FBI, DHS, even DOD have set up a biometric center in West Virginia so that they can move rapidly on cleaning up prints, but this case took apparently 15 years. It goes again to the issue of how it is difficult sometimes to detect a traveler who has nefarious plans against us. Take the example of going back to Mohammed Atta and the 9/11 scenario, or even this fellow Al-Falaj. They were capable enough to go through multiple layers, multiple travel points, multiple encounter points, and to apparently hide their intentions. Let's turn to another.
And they did catch him in the end,
Yeah,
plotting.
Yeah.
to-
So to finish the story, how do we catch him? Presumably, the prints are run regularly against the database holdings of all travelers and visa persons, and in this case, the flight school applicants to the TSA program. In one of those routine runnings, this guy's prints, which had been ingested into the system probably in 2016 or 17, after the flight school, after the visa, after the travel, then they come up. The FBI pursues the case with the JTTF team in that part of the country in Oklahoma, and they do their own investigation. They go back to his original visa application and they find a telephone number that also shows up in the material that was confiscated by the U.S. military in Kandahar. So you got a telephone number
at the Al-Qaeda training camp.
at the Al-Qaeda training camp. So this guy was very much invested into an Al-Qaeda scenario, whether he in fact harbored intentions to do us harm. The circumstantial evidence is hugely against him. In any event, he should not have had a visa, and he should not have been permitted to travel multiple times into the United States and out. A similar case, if I have time for it, is
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
So quickly, a look in the record on the case of Mohammed Massoud. Here you have an H-1B visa holder. He went to work in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. This guy very clearly held back his intentions through interviews, again, just like Al-Falaj. He only becomes known to us when, apparently, according to the record, he was using social media in an encrypted form and revealed his terrorist intentions. Again, the JTTF was there. They investigated. They found out. You can find this guy's information on LinkedIn. He had studied at Cambridge University in the UK. He had traveled internationally multiple times. He had been selected for the very rigorous Mayo Clinic program, and he still harbored terrorist intent. And we were only able to find this guy with the use of social media and follow-up enforcement in the United States. The lessons are very clear about the power of watch listing to help inform our encounters.
And he was plotting to attack fellow doctors at the Mayo Clinic for a time. And then he decided to go overseas, and he tried to go overseas to join the jihad to patch up the wounded in the battlefield.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Massoud was a determined terrorist. It is less clear about Al-Falaj, but both cases are examples of individuals that we want our border screening to keep out of the country.